Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Ideas Global monthly panel series. I'm Evelyn Espinal, your moderator for today's discussion. Before we begin, I just wanted to take a minute to check in with our audience and see how you're all doing. I know that the US election results are going to have an impact in the way that we pursue our diversity work in the next 4 years. At Ideas Global, we're here to help you think about how you might want a sounding board, and more give you that community to support you in these times of transition and change and uncertainty. Please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is posted in the chat and you can contact me directly. I'm happy to speak to every single person that wants to discuss what their future might hold. I have over 30 years of experience leading transformational change in multinational Fortune 100 blue chip companies. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to join forces with Natasha Rainey. She's the host of the All Inclusive podcast. And together we've launched this premier DEI learning community. This is where the world's top DEI executives and practitioners are coming together to share insights and co-create solutions for those unspoken things that we are yet to deal with in the field of DEI. Our ambition is to accelerate the realization of inclusion, diversity, equity, activism, and social impact. That's exactly what Ideas Global means to us. Today, we're going to have a wonderful opportunity to speak to a panel of experts on the issue of how to unlock the potential and the power of multi-generational workforce. Today, I'm joined by Kristen, Joe, and Ciara, and I would love to turn it over directly to them to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Ciara, and I'll ask, can you please tell us a little bit about you and your name, your organization, but more importantly, let's start to really help the audience get to know you a little bit better. Share with us what is driving you in this work. Why do you get up every day and want to be adding your efforts to this space?
Thank you, Evelyn, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ciara Lilly, and I am the Senior Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Diversified Maintenance. We are a national facility services company based in Tampa and are proud to be one of the first facility services companies that have formalized a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And so this work is incredibly important to us as an organization. And for me personally, I am committed to this work because I understand what it means to be underserved and to really be a part of a lot of marginalized communities. I personally represent a lot of those marginalized communities, and I know how important it is to have advocates that are thinking about how we can create more inclusive workplaces as well as just an inclusive world. We need that, especially given the current outcome of our election. I think it's even more important that we prioritize this work. And I have some fight in me. So I'm excited to be a part of this work and to continue to have an impact to make the world a better place. I'm going to pass it over to Joe to introduce herself. Joe?
Perfect, thank you. So my name's Joe Portlock. I'm the VP of Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. I'm glad you got some fight, because I think that's something D&I people share. We have fight spirit and we give each other virtual hugs and support all the time. I think what drives me, look, I'm a white woman, so I always feel like I have some privilege, and then I also have some equity barriers, and I lean in and learn from both. On a personal level, I have a non-visible disability, I'm neurodiverse, I'm a mother, and as we're talking about multi-generations, I feel it is the responsibility of every generation to make it easier for the next generation. And that's something that really drives me. I try and live to my values. That is not always easy. I'm a work in progress, but I definitely have strong personal values around social justice, around speaking the truth with integrity, and around trying to be better every single day. And then I will pass it over to Kristen.
Thank you so much, Joe. My name is Kristen Kavanaugh. I'm the CEO and founder of the Agency Initiative. The Agency Initiative, we build courageous leaders. And I'm really glad that you brought up values and trying to live in those values, because that's our mission. I think we all know that the world is full of uncertainty these days. And we need leaders, in particular in the DEI space and the HR space, but just in general, that are going to look in themselves and their values and really step up in this moment where we need you most. And so that's the work that we do here. I also fortunately sit, at least in the current moment, as the vice chair of the Department of Defense's Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, where we are making sure that our warfighters in the military are also supported from an inclusion standpoint to make sure they're meeting mission. Prior to this, starting my own company, I worked for Tesla, where I was the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that really led me to this fight that we're in today, to make sure that our workplaces are inclusive and equitable, and that we are out there doing everything that we can for the employees that go to work every single day and give it their all. I've got a lot of fight left in me, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today.
Absolutely fantastic. This is why I'm so excited about this panel. I think we're all fighters. I've mentioned this before, that for me, this was about making change, seeing change in my lifetime. And when I decided to leave corporate America, I wanted to take my 35 years of experience and the network that I have and say to the community of D&I experts and practitioners, what do you need from me? Where can I support? Where is the good fight to be had? And this has just been such a wonderful learning journey for me as we've continued to grow this business. I really want to take a time to start and understand what are the challenges that companies are experiencing with having multi-generational workforces under that one roof. And Joe, I know that you're incredibly knowledgeable about the demographic data for various generations. It would mean a lot if you could just give us a snapshot of what are some of those obvious differences between these generations that are causing conflict. And then I'd appreciate if Ciara and Kristen can also add their view.
Yeah, so I am a data geek, but I find that knowing data serves me quite well in this role, because I think a lot of CEOs come from data backgrounds or finance backgrounds. So I've always been equipped with data. And as I said, I feel like it helps me a lot in my role and proving the case for many things. And I think within generational data, some of the things that I notice, I think, firstly, menopause. As you can probably tell, I should have said it in my introduction, I'm from the UK, and we talk a lot about the menopause now in the UK. We didn't a few years ago, but actually menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. There are nearly 1 billion menopausal women in work today, and yet only 10% of companies recognize it and do any support around that. And when we looked at our own data in our organization, women at VP level, actually over 2/3 were aged 45 and above. So if we're going to have effective gender inclusion strategies, it really made sense that we have to recognize the significant transition and support many women will need going through the menopause, and yet it still is somewhat taboo to talk about. I think when we go the other end and we look at Gen Z, who, are fully in our workplace, they make up 8% of our employees. That will rise to 30% over the next 5 years. And when I think of Gen Z, I think of them as the most demographically diverse generation coming into the workplace. So nearly 50% in the US are ethnically representative or diverse. 21% identify as LGBTQ. Sadly, a lot have mental health issues. Nearly 50% say they struggle with anxiety on a very regular basis. So I think actually when we think about that generation, we know we have a lot more diversity, both representationally, but also in how they think and feel about the world. That's what really excites me, is that generation really value diversity, inclusion in culture, and a culture that supports well-being. And then I think we also need to think around different models of loyalty, right? We will have very different careers, and younger generations will have very different careers. They see loyalty and the psychological contract of work as incredibly different. And nothing's right or wrong here. I always just think data is data, right? It just gives us insight that informs our work and makes it better. So there's some of the high level stats that I pull on in key moments when I like to talk about this stuff.
Thank you for that. And I'm wondering for the rest of our panel, what has been your experience with multi-generational workforces? Any insights that you can share as well in terms of what makes them different and why it's important to think about them?
I can speak just quickly about millennials. And we talk about leadership, and we think about leadership a lot. And so I'm a millennial myself, and the millennials are going to spend the most time in the workforce as we move forward. And so I think it's really important for us to think through, how do we prepare millennials to really bridge the gap that we're in now, to make sure that we are having thoughtful conversations, that we're thoughtful about the way that we are including folks at both ends of the generational spectrum, and then also plan for this in the way that we're moving forward to be inclusive of the generations that come behind us, and make room, because we're going to be around a long time. So it's we're looking into our 70s for millennials, that they estimate that we'll be in the workforce into our 70s. And so if we can take this seriously now and start the conversations and make it meaningful to really pull in those generations, then that's something that I think is going to be important as we move forward in our leadership journeys, specifically for the millennials.
That's great insight. Thank you. Ciara, any thoughts?
Yes, no, I echo what both Kristen and Joe shared. I think that, this is an exciting time. I myself am a millennial, and, I think that we really have to start having the conversations around what can we learn from each other. One of the biggest challenges that I've identified is that there are so many generational stereotypes that are informing how we work collaboratively. And I think until we really address those stereotypes that exist, we can't really find true collaboration and learn from each other and take away best practices, because each generation has a set of best practices, a set of values that have value. And I think that a lot of what we've seen is that each generation is so fixed on their way or no way. And that's not the right model to really spark true collaboration and impact inside of our organizations. And so that challenge of not trying to dismiss the differences, but look at where the differences lie and figure out how we can leverage those differences to learn from each other and have greater impact in our organizations is going to be key in moving the needle forward.
So you've taken me right to my next question, which is really trying to understand where the similarities are within the differences, right? Because we have a very intersectional workforce. You end up checking a lot of boxes when you're a person like you, Ciara, and also me. So I'm wondering from Kristen, because I know that you've been doing a lot of work focused on intersectionality. Can you give us your view on how to begin to bridge those gaps between generations so that we can see a positive impact, not only on culture and productivity, but also profitability?
Absolutely. Thank you for Ciara for talking about the differences. I think that's what most people see more often than not. But to your point, Evelyn, we have so much more that bring us together and in common if we only take the time to find out what that is. And so at the agency initiative, we talk a lot about getting curious. So how can you really understand and care about and take the time to find those similarity points that you can find the common ground to then help you start to work through maybe some of the differences that are caused in the workplace. So I think from an intersectional point, the biggest thing is to remember is generations aren't monoliths. Just like we would say that other demographic groups aren't monoliths. We can't say that everybody has the same experience across the board, because it's just not true. And so we have to recognize that as we layer on those different factors of a person's identity, that brings in more and more complexity to their story and their experience and how they're experiencing the world and how they're showing up in the world. And so really thinking about and recognizing people's intersectional experience is important. So we used to run an exercise when I was back at Tesla, where we would bring leaders from across the company, from different parts of the business. We had every generation in our workforce and in our leadership. And so what we would do, we would have them really talk through what their experience was like with the company in those similar age groups and their similar generational groups, but then also have them tack on what it was like as that generation plus somebody as a member of their ethnicity background, or plus a member of we would bring in gender or something like that. And so we would start to see this whole rainbow of experience within a similar generation when we started talking about, I'll use myself as an example, I identify as a Black veteran woman, and millennial. And so that is a very different experience if you just look at the veteran component for somebody who maybe didn't serve in the military. And so it really is recognizing, understanding, and appreciating what those other factors of a person's experience brings to the table and how it makes their unique experience different. And so we always talk about getting curious. And so not making any assumptions, but get curious, ask questions, and understand before we just make assumptions that, you know, all veterans have this experience or all millennials have this experience. I think you'll find that that's not true once you start asking the right questions.
Yeah, and it sounds like you also need to be creating a very safe space for people to be willing to reveal so much about their identity. I know that when you told me that you identified as Black, I had a reaction. I thought you were Afro-Caribbean like myself. So it's really great that you're able to do these kinds of exercises and give people space to put out what's important for them and what they want others to know about them. How do you
Absolutely.
create that safe space, like when you're doing this kind of work?
It's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So it would take us an entire day just to build the trust and the rapport and the respect with people before we could even ask them to self-identify whatever groups they belong to that they felt comfortable. And so it really is about taking the time, showing some vulnerability yourself, and really taking the time to get to know people and build spaces that are comfortable for them to talk about these I'll say sensitive topics, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the workplace about whether we can talk about this stuff or not, and what it means and how it's going to happen. So I think as if you can take the time and the intentionality to build those safe spaces and bring people in smaller groups where they can connect with each other, you're going to find that folks want to talk about it, and it is important. It is something that's going to be impactful, but it's on you to create the space in the right way to let them bring that forward in a way that feels comfortable.
That's excellent. Let me go to Joe, because I know that you've done a lot of work with the data that you have and the different generations. So similar question to Christina, how are you bringing the intersectionality and closing some of those gaps across the generations?
Yeah, I think firstly, I echo absolutely. And I think sometimes when we look at similarity, we tend to do it on quite superficial things, right? So we tend to, the like me bias, right? We talk about I'm British, football teams, soccer teams, sports teams, music we like, but actually what do we all share in common? Like, we all want to be recognized, we all want to be heard, we all want to be valued, we all have families that we love and love us, hopefully. So actually we just try and look for commonality along the wrong lines, in my view, because fundamentally humans are pretty aligned in what we seek and what we need and what helps us be the best versions of ourselves. I think when you think through the intersectional lens of generations, I think firstly it's quite interesting if you talk to different generations. So I should have self-identified I'm a young Gen X, so I think I'll say at the cusp with the millennial rising. But you know, a Gen Xer is very concerned about job security in a way I don't think millennials and Gen Zs feel it as much. If you look at Gen Zs, they're really concerned about climate change and experience anxiety around it. So we all have like slightly different values and fears, I think, based on when we grew up, what was the biggest life event that we experienced. Did we experience it outside of work or in the world of work? And that shapes some of our thoughts and values. And I think there's also some sort of biases and practicalities. Like I said, I was neurodiverse. If you went to school in the 80s, you are so unlikely to have any sort of diagnosis of neurodiversity because it was never talked about, right? Autism was only started to get diagnosed in the 80s. So you may not even have a diagnosis around neurodiversity. Some generations are far more willing to talk about mental health and disability than other generations. There are very different global and cultural appreciations and understanding of aging, right? In some cultures, it's valued and it's praised as a positive thing of aging. I think sadly, possibly in the UK and the US, it's less positive. I think you layer in gender and you look at how, women age, and that perception of older women is not as positive, in my view, as perceptions of men who are older. And we see that play out, right? Women typically reach their career highest, or the highest point in their career, at around 40, and men it's like well into their 50s. And as mentioned, if we're all going to work to our 70s, I don't think we want to reach the peak of our career at 40 if we've got another 30 years to go. So I always think good D&I practices, of course, looking through intersectional lens, knowing, one group is not a monolith, we're all different. However, we also have to notice there are common equity barriers that sadly some groups are far more likely to experience than others, and we should lean into that, even if it's not our lived experience, because we can't live everybody's experience, but we should be open and curious is a great word that's been mentioned as well.
That's great. As somebody was not diagnosed until I was 27 for dyslexia and ADHD, Gen Xer all the way, really knowing that what you're saying is 100% true. So thank you for sharing that. Ciara, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this issue of closing the gaps and bridging the gap.
Yeah, I as everyone was sharing here, I'm thinking about, for me, it's been my take that I have to set the example, right? And so representing various diverse groups, I take the responsibility of creating the safe space through my action. So I'm very open about the different identities that I bring with me to the workplace, and I'm very open to having the conversations about it. Because I truly believe that at the helm of this work that we're doing, there has to be a focus on just talking. At sitting at the table together and just having conversation and creating, as it's been mentioned, these safe spaces for people to bring their authentic selves to the workplace and know that there's value there, that your organization is going to value all of who you are and will look to, to aid in your development and just to give you opportunity to thrive. And so for me, it was so important that I set the example in how I show up every day, that I bring all of myself to the workplace, that I hold tight to my authenticity, and that I create an environment where leaders inside of the organization feel comfortable talking to me and having those conversations. And so I think that that's so critically important because there is, I think, a little bit of apprehension that exists with bringing the totality of who we are into the workplace. And my hope is that we're moving in the direction that people see that companies want to know who you are and want to know how you show up in leadership. And when the companies have a commitment, as ours do, to really advancing DEI, they will create a space where they're able to make investments in helping you develop as a leader and helping you to shine in all of who you are. And so that's been my take. Is to really hone in on those safe spaces and to be an example for others that you can bring all of yourself to your workplace and be successful. And it's actually to me, a value add, right? That helps distinguish me and others from other leaders in the organization, because I'm not afraid to be who I am and to bring all of myself to the workplace. And so my hope is that others follow suit just by the example that I'm setting.
Oh, I love that. And I think looking at this group of incredibly powerful women, I'm sure that you're all bringing your full selves to the challenges that you're facing. And I'm sitting here wondering about what is getting in the way, right? What is not being said when we're talking about running successful businesses that have up to 5 generations interacting in the workplace? So I'm asking each of you, I'll start with Ciara. When you think about this work, what's the unspoken that's getting in our way, and that, perhaps sometimes it's the company's not ready to talk about, perhaps we're not ready to bring it up, but it really would be helpful to our audience if you could talk about those unspoken things that get in the way.
Yeah, I think that for a lot of organizations is this paralysis that exists because we don't want to get it wrong. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to to create programs that might not be impactful. So we just don't do anything, and we shift our focus to just profitability in the organization. And for us, is you have to lean into this work. You have to lean into it and trust that, yes, you will make mistakes. We'll fall short. We're going to learn. But I heard a colleague of mine say, it's grace over gotcha, right? Grace over gotcha, in that, we're not looking here, right, to, to point fingers and say, oh, you did this wrong, or you did, right? We have to extend grace and compassion as we're continuing to learn each other, right? Because there are differences there. And sometimes I think because there's a level of fear that we'll get it wrong, we just don't do anything, and we shift our focus. And for us, it's more of, let's lean into it. Let's lean into it. Let's have the difficult conversations. Let's sit and get to know each other, right? So that we can really understand what changes do we need to make to create a more inclusive environment for all of our team members. What are the things that we need to challenge ourselves to think about that we haven't thought about in the over 50 years that we've been in business? And so for me, I would say that that's the piece, is that there's a level of paralysis that exists because a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders are afraid to get it wrong. And my encouragement is to lean into it, to extend grace, to extend compassion, because that's going to help us really do this work of creating transformational change inside of our organizations if we lead with courage during this time.
I absolutely love that. As you know, I've been doing change management work in everything in my entire career. And I always remember this analogy that 98% of the time, a plane is off course towards its destination. Mm-hmm. And so it's not that you're getting it wrong. It's that you're constantly factoring in the data and adjusting so that you actually land where you want to land. And I think what you're describing is those people that are so concerned about the appearance of what we're doing that they're fearful that any moment when you're looked at, you might be perceived as being off course. And I think if we could institutionalize that for ourselves, that most of the time we're off course. You need to be directionally correct, and continue to factor in data that gets you to the point where you want to be. Thank you. I think that was fantastic insight. Joe or Christina, or Kristen, sorry.
If I may, I would just like to hire Ciara as our spokesperson for courageous leadership, if that's okay, because I think you are 100% right. That's what this moment is about how do you have the courage to be wrong? How do you have the courage to try? How do you have the courage to do what's right and what you know is in your heart? That's what courage is all about, right? Like doing what's in your heart. And so I love that you brought that up. That's the work that our company does. It's because that's what we believe is needed right now is more courage from our leaders to step into this moment. I think, Evelyn, to your question too, what's unspoken is speaking to each other. We're not speaking to each other anymore. And I think that's for a lot of reasons, right? It's because maybe, we've moved to remote teams or hybrid teams, and there isn't as much time together in maybe informal settings as we saw pre-pandemic. And I think we've all gotten really comfortable with the screens being in between us. And so how can you as a leader, or how can you as the head of DEI or the head of HR find ways for people just to speak to each other in ways where they can maybe not talk about work, but they can talk about things that help them find that commonality and the things that bring them together. I think that's what's missing is this personal connection that we've lost to each other, and the mystique that brings, and the ability to make assumptions or make judgments about who people are, what they need or what they like. We've got to find ways to come together and talk to each other and learn from each other and get curious about each other, and really learn to reconnect as a community. And I think the other thing that I'll say, if we think about authenticity and how we're like bringing that to work, like something that we like to say is like, you don't have to bring everything to work. You just need to bring what matters to the work that you do. And so figuring out what that means for you to bring what matters and your passion and your compassion and all of that to the work you do, I think helps people really come together and kind of align on a common purpose and a common mission, while also keeping their authenticity and the ability to show up as who they want to show up as.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, I mean, I echo so much of what's being said, but just to add, I think we've lost the art of politely disagreeing and debate, and silencing people, or the threat response, or the fear of getting it wrong doesn't help anybody, right? I think we need to empathize. We need to lean into our privilege sometimes, but we also need to recognize the learning opportunity and not see it as threat or negative, or not be scared to get things wrong. It's not about getting things wrong. It's about how we respond when we could be better, or when we don't do things as we should. And being humble enough to know we all have learning in all of that. I think the other thing around D&I that I think of is, it is a long-term gain. You're not going to see short-term results. And if you do, you probably did the wrong things that are not sustainable anyway. So I definitely think those are some of the barriers that people don't give it the time, because it's never going to come across your desk as urgent. And also people need to realize it's an investment. You get out what you put in, and you have to be thinking long-term in D&I. It's culture change, right? It's continuous, and it will continue to change. Best practice 5 years ago will not be best practice today, and it definitely won't be best practice in 5 years' time. And perhaps some of the things we talk about today might not be the things we will do in 5 years' time. But as long as we're all committed to being better, I think that's what makes the real difference.
You just made me think of a quote by Andre de Shields, and he says, "Slowly is the fastest way to get to where you want to be." Right? Because then you're doing it in the right way. You're setting up the right foundation. I think that's absolutely an unspoken for us, right? We have this pressure to deliver every quarter, right? Every year. And some of the work that we're doing, it's taking years to get us as unraveled as we are. It's going to take us time to be able to unravel and get to the right place. Thank you for that. So I'm wondering, I can't let this panel go without asking you to give advice to our practitioners. You know that the folks that are listening are people that care about this work as much as you do, and that are thinking to themselves, what's the next 4 years going to bring? So as they're starting to forecast their strategies, how their approaches might be shifting, what advice do you have for them? And I'd love it if we could do Ciara, Kristen, and then end with Joe. That would mean a lot.
Yes. So one of the things that I think is so critical right now for us to think about as DEI practitioners is how do we really solidify the business case for the work that we're doing? And when I say that, what I'm speaking to is really how do we align this work of DEI to not only our organization's core values, which I think is really key, but also to the bottom line of our organizations. How does DEI pay dividends, right? And so as our companies are making these intentional investments, right, really being clear about the ROI, the return on investment that exists in the work that we're doing, because that is going to really help safeguard a lot of this work that we are doing. We know that this work is impactful. We know that it's the right thing to do. We heard that. We know that there's data to support it, but there's also data that speaks to the overall business case associated with this work and how it helps companies be more productive and more profitable. And especially in this current time that we're in, where workforce demographics are shifting, we're all competing for the same talent, right? And we understand that the generations that are coming into the workforce, they are really prioritizing value alignment over a lot of other things that we've seen other generations prioritize. They want to know that companies have a heart. And so understanding that, how do we get clear on the metrics that we should be measuring and that'll speak to the overall business case so that no matter who the audience is that we're speaking to, is clear to them that this work needs to stay embedded in our company's overall strategic plans and become a part of our company's DNA. I think that is so critical. Shifting our mindset, shifting our strategy, leveraging the data, right, to firm up our business case so that we can see this work continue to evolve and continue to stay at the forefront of our organizations.
I love that. Thank you so much.
I think I'll go tactical and make another plea for Ciara to come work for us. But courage is the right thing. If you are in your values, if you are really leaning into your values as an organization, how do you get your managers and your leaders to embody those values and exhibit those values and live those values into your organization? And so I think ask yourself, what are you doing to connect this work specifically to your leaders and make sure they're showing up for you in a way that is in the company, a way that is representative of those values? The second thing, very tactical, and this is what we teach our clients. There's some free consulting. This is what we tell them: say, stop, take a beat, have a conversation. So what you really want to do is create a space for people to talk about these things. And so it's a very quick kind of tactic to start taking to your leaders. How are you getting them to stop, recognize when there's something going on, when there's a problem going on, when maybe they have conflict between folks from different generations in this case, but any kind of conflict. Get them to stop and recognize that moment and then take a beat. How do you understand and really start to process what is going on? What are the dynamics that are at play? And really just start to reflect on what's happening. And then lastly, start a conversation. How do you get them to get curious enough to then go and take action and ask the right questions, or just ask a question, or get comfortable enough to bring up how they're feeling to someone, or get people to talk together? And so doing that, to have them stop, take a beat, have a conversation, really can take a lot of the fear out of just talking to people and some of the topics that managers or leaders might be talking about, and get them comfortable to just get people reconnecting on things that they care about and things that matter, and it's going to make a difference in their team dynamic. And so that would be my very tactile advice: stop, take a beat, have a conversation.
Tactical advice, but a fantastic framework. And I think that that's what I love about this show, that we're willing to sort of give away these ideas, this advice to our audience. So thank you for that. Joe?
Yeah, I think firstly, as has been said, measure, right? Continue to measure the impact of this work. You shouldn't always have to show the ROI, but it does definitely help, and it's a great influencer. I think when we think of the next 4 years, we definitely in our business think about the impact of generative AI. What does that mean for the future workplace? Where does D&I play a role? I like to lean into the positives, that we will create workplaces with a lot more human purpose, human centricity, which I think naturally includes inclusive workplaces, empathy, psychological safety, integrated well-being into the workplace. And then when we think about future leadership skills, the whole spectrum of leadership opinion on this topic, we definitely find a point of alignment where leaders will talk about, in the future, we know we have to be more inclusive, we have to manage complexity globally, we have to manage multi-generations, we have to work in a very non-hierarchical way, we have to create environments of psychological safety. So wherever they sit on the D&I journey, that tends to be a really good point where we get a lot of alignment. And I think one of my biggest reflections doing this role is when I started, I felt like I had to have the answers to everything. And then what I've learned through is actually insight is data, right? Just getting insight. A lot of your job is gathering that insight, replaying insight, pulling together themes, but giving everybody that voice. You have to role model inclusion in inclusion work, and really kind of working with leaders that way has kind of served the work well.
I love that. It makes me think about atoms, right? Atoms are the foundation of everything. DEI is the foundation of everything. Everything that we're trying to do in corporations has to do with bringing people together, making sure that we're being equitable and fair, and ensuring that people really feel that they can contribute to the best of what they need to do. Thank you, Joe. I thought that was really fantastic advice. And thank you to this panel. I was really excited about having this conversation today. I think it was incredibly rich. It took us, yes, millennials, but yes, Gen Z, but also how do we do intersectionality? How do we have courageous leadership? How do we step in and actually stop, take a beat, and have a conversation? I think that this was just an absolutely fantastic session. I'm so grateful to all of you for your time, and for our audience for joining us here today. Remember that our last panel discussion of the year will be in December, and the panel discussion will focus on neurodiversity at work, harnessing unique minds for collective innovation. So we're looking forward for that panel as well. So thank you all for joining us and being with us today. Thank you to our panelists, and I look forward to a wonderful session in about 4 weeks. So see you then.
Thank you.